You caught me doing stuff here, and all of a sudden, this starts up. Well, hello. Welcome. We're back with OnFilm on video this week. We took a break for Christmas, and I hope everybody had a happy Christmas. I hope everybody enjoyed themselves, and if you went to the movies, I hope you stayed safe. There were a lot of movies that opened last week. We covered them all in our section, and this week there are no movies opening except Aliens coming back into theaters, the 1979 original, and I'm not going to waste a whole lot of time talking about it because I wasted a whole lot of newsprint talking about it over here in the section. Okay. The reason this is sort of... I just got off the phone. I just got off the phone doing my little radio spot I do, and we were talking about my list that ran last Sunday, my piece on the best movies of the year. I listed a top 10, an alternative top 10 or the best documentaries. I think I have more than 10, and then I had some honorable mentions, and I had a couple other things. It's one of those year-end things that critics do, and we do it because it's a convention, because people expect it, because we need to write columns, and because maybe it gives us something to remember the year by. And I don't think we're ever going to forget 2020 and the movies of 2020, which are fairly interesting. I mean, it's. I was just talking about this, so it's fresh in my mind. What we missed last year, what we missed were the big tentpole James Bond type productions that people typically associate with the cinematic experience these days. You go to the movies for sensation, to be overwhelmed by the visuals and the noise and all that stuff. Well, we didn't get that this year. And what we got this whole rash of, kind of mid-level, independent, a lot of them, dramas, adult-focused things. And for someone like me, that's okay, because that's sort of my wheelhouse. Those are the movies I like the best, generally. I am not going to be a fan. I didn't like the first Wonder Woman that much. Now, when I saw the second Wonder Woman, I really didn't like it. I kept wondering really silly things like, well, this guy's been dead 70 years. Isn't he a little bit curious about what's been happening with her? And I thought, well, this guy is not modeled on the President of the United States exactly, only he is. And I remember the 80s. I am old enough to remember the 80s, and the only time I chuckled at the costume design in Wonder Woman was when Kristen Wiig did show up in the Jane Fonda workout gear, which I think was exactly what Jane Fonda was wearing on the cover of her original workout VHS cassette. I didn't say DVD, which was what I was. I mean, think about it, it's generations ago. I mean, when we started the 80s, we were still listening to vinyl for real, rather than listening to vinyl as this sort of hipster, elitist, thing that we do now. Back then, that was what we had. We had vinyl and we had cassettes. Yeah, we had cassettes. 8-tracks were out by then, and DVDs came along a little bit later in the 80s. We didn't have them then. So I remember that era, and it didn't feel right to me. It didn't even feel right in a comic book sense. That your mileage is going to vary on that. I know that Courtney Lanning liked the film, and she's a good bit younger than me and doesn't remember the 80s, I would imagine, having not been born. But, but I'm not going to like that kind of movie that much anyway. I mean, I can get behind a good James Bond film. Tenet left me kind of like, okay, I'm glad I'm watching this. I don't care about it. I mean, sort of in the moment, I was fine with it. I didn't think very much about it afterwards, which is what you're supposed to do with a film like that. You're supposed to puzzle it out. It's supposed to engage you. And that's on me, I guess, but it didn't happen, so I'm not worried about it. I'll go on to the next movie. All right. So that leads me to the films that, because you guys may not have seen my Sunday piece, and if you did see my Sunday piece, you may not have, because there's some things I could add to this. I've seen a few more films. Like I said, I've seen Wonder Woman, I've seen Promising Young Woman, which I actually liked quite a bit. It would have at least made my honorable mention list here, and it might have even snuck into the alternative top 10. Like, any of that matters. But what I'm trying to communicate is I actually liked it, and I thought the twist was very dark, and I didn't see it coming, which was unusual because usually I'm able to see around the sides of things, and I'm sort of surprised and delighted when I'm not. So I'm surprised and delighted at Promising Young Woman, even though it's a very kind of arch film. It's got kind of a tone to it that's a little bit Ryan Murphy to me. I'm not really fond of Ryan Murphy's tone most of the time, though I've enjoyed some of the things he has. Anyway, we're going to go quickly, or maybe not so quickly, through my top 10, the alternative top 10 for 2020. And I'm not going to do the countdown thing. I'm going to start with number 1, because that's how it's written here that's how I wrote it. I figure there's really no suspense if all you want to do is glance down and see number 1, so I don't wait for the big reveal. And understand that nobody is trying to make an argument that these are necessarily better movies than other movies whose other people may consider better. I don't really get that. It's sort of like, these are movies that I think are really interesting, and I liked them, and I think that you might want to check them out. And that's it. All this hierarchical ranking stuff, I've written about that before. I think it's just silly and fun. And it is fun. It's fun because, I have a number one. But the number one movie of the year, I actually do put some thought into what I'm going to make the number one movie of the year, because I want it to be sort of representative of the year in some way that it's the movie I'm going to remember, or at least I think I'm going to remember down the road. And that would be Nomadland, which I understand very few of you probably have seen yet. It played here at the Arkansas Cinema Society's Filmland event. And some of you saw it there in the drive-in. Most of you did not, and that's okay, because it's coming in February. It's going to be released wide. And it's going to be a big Oscar film, I believe. I think Frances McDormand is probably a lock for a Best Actress nomination at least, and she'll probably win. I haven't really thought about that, but it's like Frances McDormand, Carey Mulligan, Promising Young Woman, what's her name? For the assistant, Julia Gardner, for the assistant, and I can, those three I think are probably going to be nominated for Best Actress. So it's going to be a film that people are going to think about. Nomadland, it's by, what's her name? Chloe Zhao, who did The Rider, which was one of my favorite films a couple of years ago. And it's got that same sort of mix of a fictional story a fictional story embedded in like reality, people playing themselves. Most of the people in this movie aren't actors, and they're mostly, playing characters who have their names and their backstories and their trajectories in a lot of ways. So it's a very different film, and you should wait for my review of it, or for me to really get into it, or go back and read my piece on Sunday. The second film that I really want to talk about, and I just lost my place, but that's okay, is set in Arkansas. It's not filmed in Arkansas, but it was set in Arkansas, and it's... Now, wait a minute. I have to find my place real quick here because this is just silly. Okay, now I got it back. Yes. These iPads are wonderful things. If you don't subscribe to the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, you're probably not watching this, but you should do this because these iPads are great, even though you touch them and things go away. But the second film is Isaac Lee Chung, who is, he was raised in Arkansas. His parents his South Korean parents moved here in the early 80s and settled on a farm in northwest Arkansas. And the movie, South Korean family moves here to Arkansas and settles in northwest Arkansas in a rural part of the country, not far from Rogers, but out there in the boonies. And it was actually shot in Oklahoma, and I think that's because Oklahoma probably gave them $10 more in their taxes back and the rebates and stuff. So, but that's complicated, and people film movies where they film them for all kinds of reasons, usually have to do with the money they're making or not making. And I don't hold that against this film. It is a beautiful evocation of, it's like a memory play. It reminded me in some ways of Roma, because I believe everything in this movie actually happened, even if it's a fictional story and it didn't quite happen that way. I think it's got a certain emotional truth and that it's all observed. And it's just so real in a good way. And I mean, it's sort of like, it's life-affirming. It makes you feel for these people. It makes you, feel for the people around these people. It makes you feel good about the human experience. Will Patton shows up. He's the only really recognizable for most of us. Steve Yeun has also been in some things. But he's like the most recognizable actor in it. And he plays this kind of addled neighbor of theirs. And he does a great job, a brilliant job. At first you think he's going to overplay, and at first you think there might be something that's going to happen that never happens, which is great. When something you sense or you just feel is inevitable turns out not to be that way, that's always really good, I think. So it's my number 2 film. I mean, I really love this movie. And it's funny because it's very much like my number 3 film on the list, which is Driveways, which is, I think you can now find it on, I think you can rent it online and stuff like that. But it's the last film of Brian Dennehy, but it's about an Asian American single mother who moves to upstate New York, I believe it is, to take care of the house that her sister has left her. Her estranged sister has died. Turns out her sister was a hoarder. Turns out that's a bigger job than she planned on it being. And this is like Minari. It's filtered through the eyes of an 8-year-old boy. And it's really lovely. Dennehy's great in it, and it's really one of those things that I really love. Brian Dennehy was a very nice man. I met him a couple of times, and he worked on War Eagle here in Arkansas. For Graham Gordy and Vince Insulaco, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago now, but really wonderful man, really wonderful actor too. The 4th movie on my list is Sound of Metal, which is on Amazon Prime, and it's Riz Ahmed as a punk metal drummer who loses his hearing, but it's not about that. It's more about adapting to a new normal, because most of the movie has to do with his stint at a camp where he learns how to be deaf, is the best way I can. It's a rural camp. It's, his girlfriend has to leave, has to go back to Paris, and he has to stay and try to learn how to be deaf. And I don't want to get too much into the plot mechanics of this, because I really think that a lot of it is in the textures and the way that deafness is evoked, and in some of the character performances. The guy who plays the rehabilitation counselor, Paul Racy, who's a hearing actor who grew up with deaf parents and, signs. I'm not signing, that's just me making motions, but, who does American Sign Language. Really, he's very fluent at it, and it's just a really interesting kind of. Again, it's a life-affirming movie. There's not anything on here that is going to bring you down, except for maybe Nomadland, which really doesn't, because all the bad things happen before Nomadland starts, and you leave it feeling like, well, if the worst happens, at least I could do this. So anyway, if there's a theme to this top 10 list, I'm just realizing it, and it is that, hey, These are all kind of uplifting movies. Even though First Cow ends with the two guys not working out for them, in the long run it kind of does work out for them. It's a very gentle, for the most part, story about two kind of misfit trappers in the Oregon Territory in the early 19th century, and how they sort of make their way through a tiny crime that does not necessarily lead to a great empire. But it's Kelly Reichardt, who is perhaps one of my favorite directors, and maybe my favorite director. I always love her work. It's always gentle. It's always very well observed and very, very close to how life really feels. And this is, like I said, this is not an obscure film. This has been around for a while. I think it's on Amazon Prime too now. And if not, you can find it on streaming services. And number 6, a very big surprise to me was St. Francis. I don't know why this movie hasn't gotten more run in different places. I know a lot of people like it. And I could be accused of being a homer because it's written and stars Kelly O'Sullivan, who's from North Little, who's from, the place where I live now. And, I got to interview her and her partner who directed the film, Alex Thompson, last year. And I really had we had a good conversation and really enjoyed hearing how they put this film together, because it's very autobiographical with some, elements there. But it's also very funny. I mean, I would compare it favorably to, something like Amy Schumer's big film, the one she wrote and directed. It's got sort of that same tune, and that's a lot of people are going to compare it to Amy Schumer because it's another 30-something adult who doesn't quite have her stuff together, who kind of manages to get her stuff together over the course of the film, and it stars a precocious young woman, Ramona Edith Williams, as a child, another one of those fantastic child actors. So it's just wonderful. So seek it out. Really, you'll like St. Francis. If you don't like St. Francis, you won't like it probably because of some ideological issue you have with the film. And I guess you can't help that. If you have these ideological issues with films and you don't like them because of that, for me, it doesn't matter. I mean, I can just sort of set aside all these things I believe and go, okay, these people are very different than me, if I have to watch a film. Anyway, the one that's kind of, kind of a downer is the Netflix film, I'm Thinking of Ending Things, which is a Charlie Kaufman film. It's all twisty, maybe a little too twisty for some people, but I really liked it. I've liked Kaufman's work a lot. I didn't like his novel Anthill, but I like his work a lot. It's got a lot to think about. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to hurry through these. Collective is just a straight-ahead documentary that shows you how the press ought to work. It's really nice. It's Romanian. It's about the Romanian healthcare system. It's about the heroism of a sports journalist who actually uncovers, and his newspaper who uncovered this terrible scandal. You should seek that out too. It's on various platforms. Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always is a film that got a lot of attention earlier in the year, and it sort of has some resonance with it's sort of the other side of St. Francis. It's more of a sober look at some of the same stuff. It's a 17-year-old in Pennsylvania is pregnant, wants an abortion, can't get an abortion in Pennsylvania because the law says they have to notify their parents, so she takes off on a road trip to New York with her cousin, her wonderful cousin, her wonderful, understanding cousin, Talia Ryder. Skylar is her name in the movie. And they have adventures, but it's funny, but it's not funny, ha-ha. It's sobering, but it's not crushing. It's not 5 weeks, 4 months, 3 days, but it's it's a really well done movie. The 10th movie on my list is The Assistant, which I was just talking about on the radio. It's about Julia Garner from Ozarks, who works for Harvey Weinstein. Let's just say that. She is his assistant. You never see the monster in this movie, which makes it kind of like Alien, which I'm writing about over there. But it's a monster movie. And it's one of those movies that guys like me, or guys anywhere, kind of need to like pay attention to and maybe not make eye contact with our significant others during. So anyway, I'm going to run through the alternative top 10. Any of these movies could have made the top 10, and on a different day would. And I'm going to throw A Promising Young Woman in there. Even though it's not in here in this, it's like, yes, this would be an alternative 11 now, because that was a really good film and I really enjoyed it. The Outpost, can't say enough about Rod Lurie's. It's a very naturalistic, honest. Honest does not necessarily mean naturalistic. It's naturalistic and honest war movie about. It's kind of like the closest analog would be the documentary Restrepo. Martin Eden, which you need to look up if you can find it. It's hard to find. It's on various, it's on virtual cinema platforms, which means you can't just go to Amazon Prime and rent it, but you can find it if you look for it. We'll talk about that later. In fact, I've got an email from the Martin Eden people I need to get back to here. Maybe we'll have another opportunity. I'm going to ask them about that. A White Day, wonderful Icelandic movie. As some of you know, I am one of the world experts on Icelandic cinema. Not really. But I do know a lot about Icelandic cinema. I saw Iceland is Best this year, too. It's not good. This is great. It's great, and it's a thriller, but it's a psychological thriller that really takes its time, but doesn't waste a minute. Corpus Christi was a big movie last year, but it didn't really get anywhere till this year, so I put it on this list. I showed it to my Life Quest class this year because I could show it in this age of Zoom and stuff. That was always a consideration. But also, I always try to show the best film of 2000 of the year before that didn't play in our market to my class. So this was the best film that didn't get here in 2019. Turns out it probably didn't get anywhere until 2020, but I, sort of jumped the gun on that. Hamilton. I'm a believer. I did not think I would like Hamilton. I love Hamilton. And I have not taken to singing the lyrics walking around the house. Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, I think I just wrote about that recently, so there's maybe no need to go into that, except now I get Chadwick Boseman in a way I didn't get Chadwick Boseman before, and I feel like we really did lose something big there. Bad Education, the HBO film with Hugh Jackman, that was one of the early ones from the early part of the year. The Five Bloods with Spike Lee, which I feel like I've written enough about. I love Spike. This is not the best Spike, but it is Spike, and, so it's to be reckoned with. The Wild Goose Lake is maybe the best crime thriller of the year. It came out of China. You can stream it. And the guilty pleasure film I've just put on here because I love movies like this is The Truth with Ethan Hawke, who stopped making boring movies. Ethan Hawke does not make any boring movies. It's set in Paris. It's by the director of The Shoplifters. It's got Catherine Deneuve and Juliette Binoche. I don't care. I've got to see that film, and it was very enjoyable, which isn't to say it was very good, but it was very enjoyable, and so it made my list too. Just run through the documentaries other than The Collective, City Hall, Time, Belushi, Showtime. Go see Belushi. That's a great one. The Go-Go's are also, and I think they're on HBO. I might have messed that up, but The Go-Go's is a lot of fun. It's not. I haven't seen the Bee Gees documentary yet, but if it's as good as The Go-Go's, and we've got some good music documentaries. I said Belushi. That's really good. Dick Johnson is Dead. Bloody Nose, Empty Pockets. The Painter and the Thief. You Cannot Kill David Arquette, which is another one I didn't expect to like, and I did. And it also played at Arkansas Cinema Society's Filmland. The Arquettes have a connection with them, and so I think we can expect to see their projects there regularly. But it's a worthy documentary. A Social Dilemma, which everybody knows about, I guess. Netflix. Boys State, Crip Camp, which are the two that are getting a lot of run nationally, and a lot of critics like those. After Truth, David Byrne's American Utopia, another really nice musical film, and Gunda, which was the animal film that is not quite heartbreaking, but it's, and it's shot in wonderful black and white. I have a ton of films that just miss the list. Mank, How to Build a Girl, which was early in the year and back when we saw in theaters, Black Bear, The Whistlers, Shirley, Sorry We Missed You. I could go on and on. I do go on. I mentioned like 60-something movies in this piece, and only a few of them are movies missed or movies that I mentioned because they weren't very good. And there's still some that I didn't. Greyhound, the Tom Hanks movie. Someone asked me what I didn't mention that. Well, I didn't mention that because it was okay. It was all right. It wasn't terrible. It wasn't great. Tenet, I didn't mention because it's Tenet. So, like I said, it's a snapshot of my taste of what I think, and that should be obvious. I mean, it's not like I'm trying to argue for these to be, the canon, and that they teach these in school, but. It's my opinion, and we stick to it, and we'll have another movie year next year. And it's beginning right now. I mean, today, Happy New Year. So we'll see what happens. The big thing in theaters today is Alien, and who knows what's going to be here next week. We do have a couple coming up in February, I know that. So, and stay down, take your vaccine if you can, when you can, and we'll all be okay, and we'll meet back here in a week. How's that? How's that sound? Take care, everybody be good, and